Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel UES Defiant, watching the massive screens that showed the darkness of deep space. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he didn't care. Something was happening out there. In the void, something that made his skin crawl with worry. The ship's computer systems were going crazy. Red lights flashed across every control panel, and the warning sounds never stopped. Jake had been in space for 15 years, but he had never seen anything like this. The energy readings were off the charts, coming from somewhere far beyond the edge of known space. "Sir, we're getting another signal," said Lieutenant Ben Cooper from his station. His voice was tight with stress. "It's the same pattern as before, but stronger this time." Jake walked over to the communications console and put his hand on Ben's shoulder. "Put it through the main speakers. Let's all hear what this thing is trying to tell us." The bridge filled with a sound that was not quite human. It was a voice, but wrong somehow. The words came through the universal translator, but they were broken and hard to understand. The voice spoke in a language that sounded old, ancient. Even the devourers wake from their long sleep. The cycles of death begin again. All who live in the light of stars must prepare for the harvest. None who ignore this warning shall survive what comes next. The message repeated 3 times, then cut to static. The bridge was silent except for the hum of the ship's engines. Jake felt his heart beating fast in his chest. He had heard warnings before, but this was different. This felt real. Dr. Lisa Warren, the ship's language expert, was working at her computer station. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard as she tried to make sense of the alien words. She had been studying alien languages for most of her adult life, but this one was giving her trouble. "Commander, I'm getting partial translations from at least 6 different alien languages," she said without looking up from her work, "but they're old versions, like dialects that haven't been used for hundreds of years. Whoever sent this message has been collecting languages for a very long time." Chief Engineer Pete Collins checked his instruments for the 10th time in the past hour. The readings still didn't make sense. Whatever was sending these signals was massive, bigger than anything they had ever seen. The energy signature was unlike anything in their databases. "Sir, the gravitational readings are impossible," Pete said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Whatever is out there, it's the size of a small moon, and it's moving fast, really fast." Jake felt his stomach drop. A moon-sized object moving at high speed through space was bad news for everyone. If it was heading toward inhabited systems, the damage would be unthinkable. Back on Earth, Captain Roy Henderson was having the worst day of his career. The emergency meeting at Deep Space Command had been going on for 6 hours, and nobody could agree on what to do. The conference room was filled with the most important people in Earth's military and government, and they were all shouting at each other. "This is clearly a hoax," General Bill Tucker said for the 5th time. He was a big man with a loud voice, and he used both to make his point. "Some alien group is trying to scare us into giving them something they want. We should ignore it and focus on real threats." Admiral Kate Phillips slammed her hand on the table. She was smaller than the general, but her voice cut through the noise like a knife. "Real threats? We have energy readings that suggest something the size of a space station is moving toward our galaxy. How much more real do you want it to get?" The argument continued, but Roy wasn't listening anymore. He was looking at the data from the Defiant and a dozen other ships scattered across the outer systems. Every single one was reporting the same thing. Something big was coming, and it was broadcasting a warning in dead languages. 3,000 miles away. Dr. Amy Foster was working the night shift at Research Station Outpost 7. The station was small and lonely, sitting at the edge of the solar system where few people ever came. Amy liked it that way. She could focus on her work without interruptions. Tonight, her work was terrifying her. The gravitational wave detectors had been picking up readings for the past week, and they were getting stronger. Something massive was disturbing space-time itself, creating ripples that traveled faster than light across the galaxy. Amy checked her calculations again. The math was simple, but the results were hard to believe. Based on the wave patterns, the object was not just large but also incredibly dense. It was moving in a straight line toward the Milky Way galaxy, and at its current speed, it would reach the outer systems in less than 6 months. She picked up her communication device and called her supervisor. Dr. Richard Barnes answered on the second ring, sounding tired and annoyed. "Amy, it's 3 in the morning. This better be important." "Dr. Barnes, I need you to look at the gravitational data from the past week. Something is coming toward our galaxy, and it's huge." There was a long pause. "How huge?" Amy looked at her screens again, hoping she had made a mistake. She hadn't. "Big enough to have its own gravitational field. Big enough to pull asteroids out of orbit as it passes. Dr. Barnes, I think we might be looking at something that could end everything." Back on the Defiant, Jake was reading reports from ships across known space. The picture they painted was getting worse by the hour. The signals were coming from multiple sources now, all moving in the same direction. Whatever was sending the warnings was not alone. "Commander, we're getting a new transmission," Ben called out. "This one is different. It's not in any language the computer recognizes." Jake nodded. "Put it through." This time, the voice was clearer, but the words were completely alien. The tone was urgent, desperate even. It went on for several minutes, then stopped abruptly. "Dr. Warren, any luck with that one?" Lisa shook her head. "Nothing." "But Commander, I'm starting to think these aren't just warnings. I think they're goodbye messages." Jake felt cold despite the warm air on the bridge. "What do you mean?" I think we're listening to the last words of civilizations that no longer exist. And whoever destroyed them is coming here next." The bridge fell silent again. Outside the windows, the stars looked the same as always. But Jake knew that somewhere out there in the darkness something was moving toward them, something that had already destroyed civilizations they had never heard of. The warning echoed through his mind. "None who ignore this warning shall survive what comes next." Jake had a feeling they were about to find out if humanity was smart enough to listen. 3 months had passed since the first warning signal, and Jake Morrison was no longer sleeping well. The nightmares always started the same way, darkness spreading across the stars, swallowing everything in its path. He would wake up in a cold sweat, remembering the desperate voices speaking in dead languages. The morning that changed everything started like any other. Jake was drinking his coffee on the bridge of the Defiant when every alarm on the ship started screaming at once. The main screen lit up with contacts that shouldn't exist. "Sir, we have multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace," Ben Cooper shouted. Over the noise. "They're big, and they're not in our database." Jake set down his coffee cup and moved to the captain's chair. "How many ships?" 37 and counting. "They're forming up in a defensive pattern around the outer edge of the solar system. Are they hostile?" "Unknown, sir. They're not firing, but they're also not responding to our communications." Jake felt his mouth go dry. First contact with alien life was supposed to be a moment of wonder and excitement. Instead, it felt like the beginning of the end on Earth. President Carol Hughes was having an emergency meeting with her top advisors. The Situation Room was packed with military officials, scientists, and diplomats all talking at once. The large screen on the wall showed the alien fleet, 37 ships of different shapes and sizes, all waiting just outside Earth's defenses. "Ma'am, we need to assume they're hostile," General Tucker said. "Any species that shows up without warning is probably not here to be friends." Admiral Phillips disagreed. "General, if they wanted to attack us, they would have done it already. They have the numbers and the position. I think they're here for another reason." The debate was interrupted when the communications officer raised his hand. "Ma'am, we're getting a transmission from the alien fleet. It's in English." Everyone in the room went quiet. President Hughes nodded. "Put it through." The voice that came through the speakers was clearly not human, but it spoke English with surprising clarity. "People of Earth, we come not as conquerors, but as refugees. We seek audience with your leaders. We bring warning of the great darkness that follows us." Lieutenant Colonel Dan Parker was chosen to lead the first contact team. He had experience with difficult negotiations, but nothing had prepared him for this. The alien shuttle that approached Earth was unlike anything in human technology. It seemed to be grown rather than built, with smooth curves and surfaces that pulsed with soft light. The alien delegation consisted of representatives from 12 different species. Their leader was a tall, thin creature with 4 arms and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. He introduced himself as Ambassador Zethkar of the Altarian Republic. "Colonel Parker," Zethkar said in his strange musical voice, "we apologize for arriving without invitation. But time is short, and the enemy we flee does not wait for diplomatic protocols." Dr. Helen Brooks, the team's technology specialist, studied the aliens with professional interest. Each species was completely different from the others. Some were tall and thin, others short and stocky. Some had fur, others had scales, and a few seemed to be made of living crystal. "Ambassador," Dan said carefully, "we received warning signals 3 months ago." "Were those from your people?" Zethkar's expression became sad. "Not from us, Colonel. Those were the final broadcasts of the Kaleri Federation. They held the line for 6 days before their worlds were consumed. We barely escaped with our lives." Another alien stepped forward. This one was covered in battle scars and moved like a soldier. "I am Commander Thrickstal. My people have fought the Devourers 3 times across the centuries. Each time we lost more than we saved. Each time we learned that conventional weapons are useless against them." Dr. Brooks raised her hand. "What exactly are these Devourers? Are they a species like us?" Thrickstal's eyes darkened. "They are not like any species you have ever encountered. They are living ships, guided by a hunger that has consumed entire sectors of the galaxy. They do not simply destroy civilizations, they harvest them." "Harvest?" Don asked. "They take everything," Zethkar explained. "The biomass of entire populations, the knowledge stored in computer systems, the very metals and minerals of worlds. They leave nothing behind but empty space and dead stars." The alien delegation brought gifts, but they were not the kind of gifts that made anyone feel better. They carried weapons technology, shield generators, and most importantly, tactical data about their enemy. The technology was centuries ahead of anything humans had developed. Dr. Brooks examined the alien weapons with growing concern. "These energy weapons are incredibly advanced, but you say they don't work against the Devourers?" "The enemy adapts," Thrickstal said. "Their ships are not built but grown. They learn from every attack, becoming resistant to weapons that have harmed them before. What works once will never work again." The most terrifying part of the presentation was the holorecordings. The aliens had brought visual records of previous encounters with the Devourers. The human observers watched in horror as entire fleets were dissolved by ships that looked more like living creatures than machines. The Devourer ships moved like sea creatures, flowing through space with grace and deadly purpose. When they attacked, they seemed to absorb the energy weapons fired at them, growing stronger with each hit. Conventional missiles and projectiles simply bounced off their adaptive hulls. "How many ships are in their fleet?" President Hughes asked during the secure video conference. "The advanced scouts number in the hundreds," Zethkar replied. "The main fleet contains thousands of vessels, each one capable of destroying a planet. They are 3 months away from your outer colonies." The room fell silent. 3 months too? Prepare for an enemy that had destroyed civilizations far more advanced than Earth. "What do you want from us?" President Hughes asked. "Nothing," Zethkar said. "We offer our knowledge and our remaining weapons freely. We ask only for the right to stand with you when the end comes. We have run long enough." General Tucker leaned forward. "Why would you help us? What's in it for you?" Commander Thrickstal's scarred face showed something that might have been a smile. "Because, General, humanity is the first species we have encountered that still fights with primitive weapons. Your ships carry kinetic projectiles and chemical explosives. The Devourers have never faced such technology." "You think our primitive weapons might work?" Admiral Phillips asked. "We think," Zethkar said slowly, "that your primitive weapons might be the key to survival. The Devourers adapt to energy-based attacks because that is all they have ever encountered. But your species still uses metal bullets and chemical bombs. They may not know how to defend against such simple weapons. President Hughes looked around the room at her advisors. The weight of the decision was crushing. Accept help from aliens and prepare for a war they might not win, or reject the offer and face the coming storm alone. We accept your offer, she said finally. If we're going to die, we'll die fighting. The aliens exchanged glances, and for the first time since they had arrived, Zethkar looked hopeful. Then perhaps, he said, this time will be different. The next 2 months passed in a blur of desperate preparation. Major Sam Roberts had not seen his family in weeks. He stood on the construction platform of Defense Station Alpha, watching as human and alien workers built the largest weapons platform in Earth's history. The station was 3 miles long and packed with every weapon system they could fit. Major, the railgun batteries are online, reported Chief Engineer Martinez. We've got 48 heavy cannons loaded with tungsten rounds. The aliens say. They've never seen anything like them. Sam nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. The Devourer scouts were only 2 weeks away from the outer colonies. Every day brought new reports from the monitoring stations. The enemy was moving faster than expected, and they were not alone. Dr. Eric Thompson was working around the clock in the weapons research lab. His team had been given an impossible task: create weapons that could hurt an enemy that adapted to everything. The answer, he hoped, lay in humanity's long history of warfare. The key is unpredictability, Eric explained to his team of human and alien scientists. The Devourers have fought advanced civilizations for thousands of years. They know how to counter energy weapons, plasma cannons, and particle beams. But they've never faced a species that still uses gunpowder and metal projectiles. Dr. Sarah Kim, one of the alien scientists, looked confused. But surely kinetic weapons are primitive compared to energy-based systems? Eric smiled. That's exactly what we're counting on. The Devourers have never needed to develop defenses against primitive weapons because no advanced civilization uses them. We're going to hit them with everything from artillery shells to nuclear missiles. The first test came sooner than anyone expected. Commander Jake Morrison was still patrolling the outer system when the Devourer scouts arrived. There were only 3 of them, but they were unlike anything in the tactical databases. The ships looked alive. Their hulls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and they moved through space like sea creatures swimming through water. They were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. All ships, this is Commander Morrison. We have 3 enemy contacts approaching the defense line, battle stations. Captain Alex Carter commanded the battlecruiser Use Vengeance, the newest ship in Earth's fleet. His crew was a mix of humans and aliens, all working together for the first time. The ship was armed with both human and alien weapon systems. Target. The lead ship with plasma cannons, Alex ordered, full power. The bright blue energy beam struck the Devourer ship directly. For a moment, it seemed to slow down. Then the hull began to change, shifting and adapting. The plasma beams passed right through the ship as if it wasn't there. Plasma cannons are ineffective, reported the weapons officer. The ship is adapting to our energy signature. Alex felt his heart sink. The aliens had warned them about this. But seeing it happen was different. The Devourer ship was learning how to counter their weapons in real time. Chief Gunner Santos, load the rail guns with tungsten rounds. Target the same ship. Chief Gunner Maria Santos had been skeptical about the rail guns at first. They seemed too simple, too old-fashioned. But she followed orders and fired a spread of metal projectiles at the enemy ship. The tungsten rounds hit the Devourer ship like hammers. The hull, which had adapted to energy weapons, had no defense against simple metal moving at incredible speed. The projectiles punched through the ship's hull, causing explosions and venting atmosphere. Direct hit, Maria shouted. The ship is damaged and losing power. The other 2 Devourer ships immediately changed course, moving away from the human fleet. But before they retreated, they sent a message that chilled everyone who heard it. Your resistance is noted. Your weapons are cataloged. Your species will be studied. Your consumption will be educational. The victory was small but important. For the first time, someone had hurt the Devourers. The news spread through the combined fleet like wildfire. The aliens looked at the humans with new respect, and the humans began to believe they might actually have a chance. Colonel Nick Davis was analyzing the battle data when he made a discovery that changed everything. The Devourers were not just adapting to weapons. They were learning tactical patterns, studying how the fleet moved and fought. "They're treating this like a research project," Nick explained to the command staff. "Every battle gives them more data about how we fight. They're not just trying to win, they're trying to understand us." Intelligence Officer Tony Garcia had been studying the alien archives, looking for any advantage they could use. What he found was disturbing. The Devourers had been collecting data on different species for millions of years. They had fought energy-based civilizations, biomechanical races, and even species that used pure thought as a weapon. "They have counters for everything," Tony reported. "Energy weapons, biological attacks, psychic assaults, quantum manipulation. They've seen it all before. What about kinetic weapons?" asked Admiral Phillips. "That's the thing," Tony said. "There's no record of them ever fighting a species that still used primitive projectile weapons. Every civilization they've encountered had moved beyond gunpowder and metal bullets." The main Devourer fleet arrived on schedule, appearing at the edge of the solar system like a dark cloud. There were thousands of ships, each one different from the others. Some were massive dreadnoughts the size of cities. Others were smaller, but moved with deadly grace. Commander Susan Blake was monitoring the enemy fleet when she noticed something strange. The Devourers were organizing themselves in perfect mathematical patterns. Their formations were precise, calculated, and completely predictable. "They're using algorithms," Susan realized. "Their entire fleet movement is based on mathematical models. They're optimizing for fighting conventional energy-based weapons." Admiral Chris Morgan was facing the hardest decision of his career. The alien allies wanted to fight in formation, using coordinated tactics that had worked for thousands of years. But the Devourers had counters for coordinated tactics. "Admiral, we need to do something they've never seen before," Susan said. "We need to abandon formation and fight like humans." "What do you mean?" "I mean, we need to stop fighting like a proper military and start fighting like chaos. No formations, no coordination, no predictable patterns. Just pure human stubbornness and improvisation." The alien commanders were horrified by the suggestion. Fighting without formation was suicide. It went against everything they had learned about space combat, but Admiral Morgan had served in enough wars to know that sometimes the best strategy was to throw away the rulebook. "All ships, this is Admiral Morgan. We're going to do something the enemy has never seen before. We're going to fight like humans." The order went out across the fleet: break formation, ignore tactical doctrine, and engage the enemy in completely unpredictable ways. The alien crews thought the humans had lost their minds. Lieutenant Commander Jane Miller was leading her fighter squadron when the order came through. Her pilots looked at her in confusion. "Ma'am, did the Admiral really tell us to ignore formation?" Jane grinned. "That's exactly what he said. Gentlemen, we're going to show these aliens how humans really fight. No rules, no formation, no mercy. Just find a target and hit it with everything we've got." The human fighters scattered across the battlefield like angry hornets. They dove at enemy ships from impossible angles, fired their weapons in patterns that made no sense, and somehow managed to avoid being destroyed. The Devourer ships, designed to counter organized attacks, struggled to respond to the chaotic human assault. Their adaptive systems couldn't predict what the humans would do next, because the humans themselves didn't know. For the first time in millions of years, the Devourers were confused. And confusion, as humanity was about to prove, was the first step toward defeat. The battle for Earth's solar system had been raging for 6 hours, and nothing was going according to plan. That was exactly what Admiral Chris Morgan had hoped for. His fleet was scattered across space in a pattern that would make any military academy instructor cry. But it was working. Lieutenant Commander Jane Miller pulled her fighter into a spin that should have killed her. The G-forces pressed her into her seat as she dove toward a devourer ship that was 3 times the size of her entire squadron. Her wingman, Lieutenant Bobby Chun, was screaming into his radio. "Jane, what are you doing? That's a suicide run." "Maybe," Jane replied, checking her weapons. "But it's a suicide run they won't see coming." Her fighter carried a payload that would have seemed ridiculous to the aliens: 12 chemical explosive warheads, each one packed with old-fashioned TNT and metal fragments. The kind of weapons that human armies had used centuries ago, the Devourer. Ship sensors tracked her approach, but its defensive systems were programmed to counter energy weapons and guided missiles. The ship's hull began to adapt, preparing for plasma fire or particle beams. It was not prepared for Jane to ram her fighter directly into its side and detonate 1,000 pounds of explosives. The explosion tore a hole in the Devourer ship's hull. Jane's fighter was destroyed, but her ejection seat carried her clear of the blast. She watched through her helmet visor as the alien ship began to lose power and drift. "That's for everyone you've killed," she whispered. On the other side of the battle, Sergeant Kyle Adams was leading the most impossible mission of his career. His team of 12 Marines had volunteered to board a Devourer command ship. The aliens had said it was suicide, but Kyle had different ideas. "Remember, gentlemen," he told his team as their boarding pod approached the enemy ship, "these things have been fighting advanced civilizations for millions of years. They know how to handle energy weapons, plasma cutters, and molecular disruptors, but I bet they've never seen a good old-fashioned shotgun." The boarding pod punched through the Devourer ship's hull like a bullet through paper. Kyle's team poured out of the pod with weapons that would have looked at home in a museum: pump-action shotguns, automatic rifles, and hand grenades. The inside of the Devourer ship was a nightmare. The walls were alive, pulsing with organic machinery. That looked like the inside of a giant creature. Strange lights flashed in patterns that hurt to look at, and the air smelled like death and decay. "Spread out," Kyle ordered. "Find the control center and blow it up. Use the C4 charges on anything that looks important." The first Devourer defender they encountered was a creature that seemed to be part machine and part living flesh. It moved. Within human speed, its weapon systems charging up to fire some kind of energy blast. Kyle shot it with his shotgun. The simple lead pellets tore through the creature's adaptive armor like it wasn't there. The creature collapsed, its systems sparking and dying. "Well, that was easy," said Corporal Tim Rodriguez, reloading his rifle. "These things really don't know how to deal with bullets." Meanwhile, Colonel Nick Davis was coordinating the fleets. Chaotic attacks from the command ship. The battle data flowing across his screens made no sense from a tactical standpoint, but it was working. The Devourer fleet was struggling to respond to the human assault. "Sir, the enemy is trying to adapt to our weapons," reported Lieutenant Sarah Fox. "But they can't seem to figure out our tactics." Nick grinned. "That's because we don't have any tactics. We're just making it up as we go along." The truth was that the Devourers had never fought an enemy like humanity. Every other species they had encountered had followed logical patterns, used predictable strategies, and fought according to established military doctrine. The humans were doing none of those things. Dr. Rachel Stone was watching the battle from the research station when she made a crucial discovery. The Devourer ships were not just adapting to individual weapons. They were trying to adapt to the entire human fighting style. "They're analyzing our chaos," she reported to Admiral Morgan. "Their computers are trying to find patterns in our randomness. But human randomness isn't truly random. It's based on emotion, instinct, and individual choice." "What does that mean?" the Admiral asked. "It means they're trying to solve a puzzle that has no solution. They're looking for logic in actions that are based on feelings and gut reactions. It's driving their systems crazy." The turning point came when Captain Alex Carter made a decision that would have gotten him court-martialed in any normal battle. His ship was badly damaged, most of his weapons were offline, and a massive Devourer dreadnought was moving in for the kill. "Sir, we should retreat," urged his first officer. "We can't win this fight." Alex looked at the enemy ship and made a choice that was pure human stubbornness. No, we're going to ram them. Sir, that's suicide. Maybe, but it's going to hurt them a lot more than it hurts us. The used Vengeance turned toward the Devourer dreadnought and accelerated to ramming speed. At the last moment, Alex ordered all remaining nuclear warheads to be armed and set for contact detonation. The collision was spectacular. The Vengeance struck the dreadnought's hull and penetrated deep into its core before the nuclear warheads detonated. The explosion lit up space for hundreds of miles, and when the light faded, both ships were gone. The destruction of the dreadnought sent shockwaves through the Devourer fleet. For the first time in their long history, they were facing an enemy that would rather die than surrender. An enemy that fought with weapons and tactics they couldn't understand or counter. Intelligence. Officer Tony Garcia was monitoring enemy communications when he detected something unprecedented. The Devourers were retreating. Not to a better position, but away from the battle entirely. "Admiral, the enemy fleet is pulling back," he reported. "They're not regrouping. They're leaving." Admiral Morgan couldn't believe it. "Are you sure?" "Yes, sir. They're broadcasting on multiple frequencies. I'm getting a translation now." The message that came through the communications system was unlike anything the Devourers had ever sent before. Instead of threats and promises of consumption, it was a warning to their own kind. Species designation, human, classification, unpredictable. Threat level, extreme, recommendation, avoid at all costs. New protocols required for engagement. Dr. Helen Brooks was analyzing the retreating enemy fleet when she made a disturbing discovery. The Devourers were not running away in fear. They were withdrawing to study what had happened. "They're treating this as a learning experience," she told the command staff. "They've never been forced to retreat before, and they want to understand why it happened." The victory was real, but it came with a price. The Devourers had learned that humanity existed, and they had seen firsthand what human chaos could do to their ordered systems. The next time they returned, they would be prepared, but for now, Earth was safe. The alien refugees looked at the humans with a mixture of respect and fear. They had seen civilizations rise and fall, but they had never seen anything like humanity's refusal to follow the rules of war. Ambassador Zethkar approached Admiral Morgan after the battle. "Your species has done something remarkable today. You have shown that even the Devourers can be defeated." "We got lucky," Morgan replied. "Next time they'll be ready for us." "Perhaps," Zethkar said, "but they will never be ready for what you truly are. Chaos cannot be calculated, and humanity is chaos given form." The battle was over, but the war was just beginning. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, the Devourers were analyzing the data from their first defeat. They were learning to fear. Humanity and fear was something they had never experienced before. Earth had won the first round, but the enemy would return. And when they did, they would bring something they had never used before: caution. 6 months after the battle that shook the galaxy, Earth looked nothing like it had before. The planet that had once been a quiet backwater world was now the military headquarters of a dozen different species. Ships from across the galaxy arrived daily, all wanting to learn the secret of defeating the Devourers. Admiral Kate Phillips stood in the command center of the new Galactic Defense Station, watching as alien delegates studied human military tactics. The irony was not lost on her. Species that had mastered faster-than-light travel and energy manipulation were now learning how to use gunpowder and metal bullets. "Admiral, we have another delegation from the Centauri Alliance," reported Captain Frank Miller. "They want to know if we can teach them how to fight without formation." Kate sighed. "Send them to Colonel Davis. He's become our expert on chaos theory." The truth was that nobody really understood why the human approach had worked so well. Military academies across the galaxy were rewriting their textbooks, trying to figure out how to teach randomness and unpredictability to species that had spent thousands of years perfecting order and logic. Dr. Walter Price was working in his laboratory, studying the Devourer technology they had captured during the battle. What he had found was both fascinating and terrifying. The enemy ships were not just alive, they were intelligent. Each one was a combination of biological organism and advanced computer system. The scary part, Walter explained to his research team, is that they learn from every encounter. Every battle makes them smarter. They were already adapting to our weapons by the end of the fight. His assistant, Dr. Lisa Park, looked up from her computer. But they retreated. Doesn't that mean we won? We won the battle, Walter said. But they're still out there, studying what happened. They're not going to make the same mistake twice. The captured Devourer technology revealed the true scope of their enemy. The creatures had been traveling the galaxy for millions of years, consuming civilizations and adding their knowledge to a vast collective intelligence. They had detailed records of every species they had encountered, every weapon they had faced, every tactic they had countered, but there was no record of anything. Like humanity, meanwhile, Lieutenant Commander Jane Miller was training new pilots in the art of chaotic combat. Her students were a mix of humans and aliens, all trying to learn how to fight without following any rules. The key, Jane told her class, is to not think too much. The moment you start planning, you become predictable. The moment you become predictable, you become dead. One of her alien students, a careful and logical creature from the Vega system, raised his hand. But Commander, how can we coordinate attacks if we don't plan them? You don't coordinate, Jane replied. You improvise. You react, you trust your instincts and hope for the best. The alien looked horrified. That sounds like madness. Welcome to humanity, Jane said with a grin. The real challenge was preparing for the Devourer's return. Intelligence reports suggested they were massing a new fleet somewhere in the dark space between galaxies. This time, they would not underestimate. Their enemy, Colonel Nick Davis, had been promoted to general and put in charge of developing new tactics. His job was to figure out how to stay unpredictable against an enemy that was actively studying human behavior. The problem, Nick explained to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is that chaos only works if the enemy doesn't understand it. The Devourers are learning. Next time, they'll be ready for our randomness. So what do we do? Asked General Patricia Wong. We get more random, Nick said. We become so unpredictable that even we don't know what we're going to do next. The solution came from an unexpected source, Dr. Amy Foster. The scientist who had first detected the Devourers approaching had been studying human psychology. She discovered that humans were most unpredictable when they were emotional, scared, or angry. The Devourers understand logic, Amy explained to the Defense Council. They can counter strategy and tactics, but they don't understand emotions. They don't know how to fight an enemy that makes decisions based on feelings rather than calculations. The new training program was unlike anything in military history. Instead of teaching soldiers to control their emotions, they were taught to use them. Fear, anger, love, and hope became weapons in the fight against an enemy that had no feelings at all. The first test of the new approach came when Devourer scouts returned to the outer systems. This time, there were more of them, and they moved with greater caution. They had learned from their previous defeat. Commander Jake Morrison, now captain of the new battleship UES Defiance, led the response. His ship was armed with a mixture of human and alien weapons, but more importantly, it was crewed by beings who had learned to fight with their hearts as well as their minds. All stations, this is Captain Morrison, he announced over the ship's communication system. The enemy is back and they think they understand us now. Let's show them how wrong they are. The battle was smaller than the previous one, but it was no less intense. The Devourers had developed new tactics, new defenses, and new ways of countering human weapons. But they had not learned how to counter human emotion. When Sergeant Kyle Adams led another boarding party onto an enemy ship, he didn't follow any plan. He simply got angry at the creatures that had tried to destroy his world, and he let that anger guide his actions. His team followed his lead, fighting with a fury that the Devourers could not calculate or predict. The enemy scouts were defeated, but they managed to send a message back to their main fleet before they were destroyed. The message was longer and more complex than anything the Devourers had ever broadcast. Tony Garcia, now promoted to major, worked with Dr. Lisa Warren to translate the alien communication. What they found was disturbing. They're not just studying our tactics anymore, Lisa reported. They're trying to understand our emotions. They're analyzing fear, anger, and love like they're mathematical equations. The implication was clear. The Devourers were adapting not just to human weapons and tactics, but to human nature itself. They were learning to fight against chaos by trying to understand the emotions that created it. But there was something else in the message, something that gave everyone hope. The Devourers were afraid. For the first time in their long history, they were experiencing fear, and they didn't know how to handle it. Fear is just another emotion, Amy Foster pointed out, and emotions make you unpredictable. The more they try to understand us, the more they become like us. The war was far from over. The Devourers would return with a larger fleet and new strategies. But they would also return with something they had never had before: doubt. They had learned that they could be defeated, and that knowledge would change them forever. Earth had become more than just another world in the galaxy. It had become a symbol of hope for every species that had ever faced the Devourers. The planet that had once been ignored by the galactic community was now its greatest defender. Admiral Kate Phillips looked out at the stars from her command center, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, the enemy was preparing for the next battle. But she also knew that humanity had given the galaxy something it had never had before: a fighting chance. The warning still echoed through space, but now it had a different meaning. You won't survive what comes next, it said. But it was no longer a message from the victims to the living. It was a promise from humanity to the Devourers. The chaos was coming, and this time it would be armed with both bullets and hope.